the Bitcoin. You've probably heard a lot about the digital currency lately. And if you're wondering what the Bitcoin buzz is all about, well, here's how it works. You download a virtual wallet onto your computer or your phone. It gives you an address, which you can exchange with others in order to make payments. So it's a person-to-person transaction with no central bank in between. You can also buy or sell Bitcoins for other currencies. And the value of the virtual Bitcoin has surged recently. It hit an all-time high of more than $900 on Tuesday before plunging just to above $500. And at last check, Bitcoin was trading at about $479. Compare that to only a year ago when one Bitcoin cost just $12. The spike in its price is partly due to recent comments from U.S. officials who called the currency a legitimate financial service. But they're not the first to recognize Bitcoin's potential promise. The largest Bitcoin exchange in the world is located in China. For more on the rise of the Bitcoin, let's bring in our regular contributor, Nicholas Thompson. He's editor for the NewYorker.com. Nicholas, great to see you once again. Now, we had this hearing this week on Capitol Hill. U.S. lawmakers and even the Fed chair made positive comments about at least the potential of digital currencies. So why has the Bitcoin suddenly seen this change in attitude?
Well, I think for one thing, in the United States, people in the United States are a little bit afraid that all Bitcoin transactions and the center of gravity for Bitcoin is all moving to China. So it's time for U.S. regulators to start taking it seriously, because that would actually help them control it and help more of the transactions and more of what happens with Bitcoins go on in this country. So the United States government is starting to realize, wait a second, this is important, let's get involved. Another big thing that happened was that about a month ago, the online drug retailer, online drug marketplace Silk Road, was shut down by the FBI. Silk Road was known as the place where many Bitcoin transactions took place. In fact, it was sort of synonymous with the word Bitcoin. It was shut down, Bitcoins didn't go away. It suddenly seemed like Bitcoins were more resilient, and not only that, people start thinking of them as more legitimate things now that the drug marketplace that they associated them with has gone away.
Okay, so you talked about Silk Road, and that brings us to the issue of regulation. And it wasn't just Silk Road that went down. A Chinese trading exchange recently just closed up, and suddenly $4 million of investors' money just disappeared. So we see that it is still sort of a murky underworld there. So how exactly do you regulate something like the Bitcoin, which is so very new?
Well, it's extremely hard to regulate. In fact, sort of the whole purpose of the Bitcoin was that it would be hard to regulate, right? It was created by an anonymous computer programmer who set it up in such a way that governments couldn't really track it very clearly. They couldn't control it, or they couldn't control it completely. It was set up by a guy who didn't like the idea that the government could just print money and devalue the rest of the currency. So let's build a computer program that will break away from that system. So how do you regulate it? That's something the U.S. government is grappling with and doesn't really have a clear plan right now. The first thing you can do is you determine, okay, what exactly is it? How are we going to classify it? Then how are we going to classify the exchanges onto which transactions flow? How are we going to regulate companies that accept Bitcoins and use Bitcoins in transactions? So what the government is trying to do is first figure out how to categorize it, then come up with a set of rules. What they found is that every time they come up with a rule, it actually really helps Bitcoin because it helps to legitimize it.
Okay, I want to ask you what you think about it as sort of an investment tool, because after this Capitol Hill hearing, we saw the value of the Bitcoin jump up 45% in one day, and no currency really ever does that. So shouldn't that be a red flag to all of us that this kind of an investment or asset, if you want to call that, could eventually lead to a bubble that bursts?
Oh, absolutely, right. The price of Bitcoins fluctuates wildly. That's why some vendors have been slow to adopt it. But here's the investment case for Bitcoin. The way the system was set up, there are only going to be 21 million Bitcoins in circulation. They're printed at a regular speed. So if you believe that a large number of transactions, or a significant percentage of the world's transactions, will take place in Bitcoins over time, you know that the number of Bitcoins in circulations will be regulated, so those Bitcoins will be worth a lot of money. And that's why Bitcoins have surged in value. On the other hand, the more that people view Bitcoins as an investment vehicle, and the less they spend Bitcoins, then the fewer Bitcoins are actually circulating, the less incentive there is for businesses to use them, and people hoard them, which means they're not being used, which in a way actually leads to a reduction in their value. So what I'm saying is that this is a very immature and confused market. Some people think it's going to be worth tons of money, but if they're not adopted by lots of stores and if they don't really start to circulate, they won't be worth a lot. So it's in a very confused, complicated place. It goes up, it goes down, and that's a big problem for the currency at the moment.
And we've seen it go down already since that Capitol Hill hearing. All right, Nicholas, thank you very much for your take and your expertise there. Nicholas Thompson there from NewYorker.com.